It was a cold Thursday morning in late November, the kind where the wind feels like it cuts right through your jacket. Commuters hurried past the old brick buildings of downtown, eyes down, breaths turning into pale clouds in the air. Among them stood a young man named Daniel Reyes, leaning against a lamppost, his guitar case open at his feet. Inside, a few crumpled bills and coins rattled with the gusts of wind. Daniel wasn't just playing the guitar, he was pouring his soul into every note. His voice was deep, raw, and achingly beautiful, the kind that makes you forget, just for a moment, where you are and why you were rushing. But still, most people didn't stop. They had jobs to get to, errands to run, lives to live. Daniel understood. He'd been invisible for a long time. Just 6 months earlier, Daniel had been living in his car after losing both his job and his apartment in the same brutal month. He'd tried everything, day labor, dishwashing, temp gigs, but nothing stuck. Music was the only thing he had left that made him feel alive. So, he played on the street corners, not for fame or fortune, but because singing was the only way he knew how to survive the silence of loneliness. One afternoon, while strumming outside a coffee shop, Daniel began to sing an old Sam Cooke song, "A Change Is Gonna Come." His voice carried a depth of pain and hope that stopped a woman named Claire in her tracks. She was in her early 40s, with tired eyes that looked like they'd seen too much of life in too little time. She listened, tears forming in the corners of her eyes. When Daniel finished, she clapped softly and stepped forward. "You have a gift," she said. "Why aren't you singing somewhere bigger?" Daniel chuckled. "Bigger places don't usually want guys who sleep in their cars." Claire hesitated, then asked, "Would you come by my community center sometime? We're hosting a charity event next week. No pay, but I think people need to hear you." Daniel could have said no. He could have protected himself from the sting of false promises. But something in Claire's voice felt genuine, so he agreed. The following Friday, Daniel walked into the modest community center, clutching his guitar like a lifeline. The place was buzzing, tables covered in potluck dishes, kids running between chairs, neighbors greeting each other warmly. Claire introduced him as a special guest, and he felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in a long time, belonging. He sang 3 songs that night. By the second, the chatter in the room had faded into complete silence. By the third, people were wiping tears from their eyes. When he finished, the applause was deafening. Daniel stood there, stunned. He'd grown used to being background noise, not the center of attention. Afterward, an older man in a worn baseball cap approached him. "Son," he said, "you ever thought about auditioning for America's Got Talent? My daughter works for the show. I think you've got something they can't ignore." Daniel almost laughed it off. People said things like that all the time. But the man handed him a card, and something in his steady gaze made Daniel believe, just for a moment, that maybe it wasn't a joke. 2 months later, Daniel found himself standing backstage at a massive theater, lights blazing, cameras rolling. He was shaking so hard he could barely hold his guitar. When the host called his name, he stepped out onto the stage, squinting under the blinding spotlights. The judges asked about his story, and he told them, briefly, about losing his job, his home, and finding solace in street music. One judge leaned forward. "And what are you singing for us today?" Daniel took a deep breath. "A song I used to sing on the corner when I thought no one was listening." He began to play, and the theater seemed to shrink until it was just him, his guitar, and 1,000 hearts beating in unison. His voice soared, powerful yet fragile, filling the space with every ounce of pain, love, and hope he had ever carried. By the final note, the entire audience was on their feet. One judge wiped away tears. Another slammed the golden buzzer. Gold confetti rained down as Daniel covered his face, overcome with emotion. For the first time in years, he felt seen, not just as a singer, but as a human being worth noticing. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind: interviews, rehearsals, messages from strangers saying his voice had given them hope. But what stayed with Daniel wasn't the fame or the TV lights. It was the memory of Claire's small community center, the way that one act of kindness had set off a chain of events that changed everything. Months later, after the show ended, Daniel returned to that same street corner downtown. This time, he wasn't there out of desperation. He was there to give back. He opened his guitar case, but instead of collecting money, he was handing out envelopes, each with a few bills inside. To struggling musicians, single parents, and anyone who looked like they needed a hand. A man in a tattered coat approached him and asked, "Why are you doing this?" Daniel smiled. "Because someone once stopped to hear me sing when they didn't have to. And it changed my life. Maybe today's the day your life changes, too." And with that, Daniel picked up his guitar and began to sing, not for fame, not for cameras, but for the sheer, unshakable belief that music, kindness, and a little bit of faith could still change the world.